Okay, welcome to another edition of Monocle and Spade, the podcast of epic archaeology, where we explore the world of the Bible and beyond through the lens of history and archaeology. Well, I'm really excited today to have a really fascinating topic that I know some people may think is controversial, but we're not really going to talk about so much controversy today, but we are going to talk about really an amazing period in New Testament history, and that is the period of when the book of Revelation was written. And we have a great guest today to talk about and discuss this with us. Not only we're going to talk about that, we're also going to talk about the archaeology and the history of Turkey and Asia Minor, a really amazing country that I've had the really great blessing to visit and hope to go back again very soon. But joining with me today, I have Dr. Mark Wilson, who is joining with us today from Turkey. He is coming live from Antalya, Turkey. Mark is actually an American scholar who's lived in Turkey with his wife, Dindi, since 2004. He is the founder and director of two organizations, an organization called the Seven Churches Network, in which you can check out. It's www.sevenchurches.org, and the Asia Minor Research Center in Antalya. The purpose of this center and the purpose of Mark is to promote the study of early Judaism and Christianity in Asia Minor within the context of the Greco-Roman world. He regularly leads field trips to biblical sites in Turkey and other countries in the Eastern Mediterranean. He's also conducted seminars for Turkish tour guides on Turkey's biblical heritage. He's also the author and editor of numerous books, including 4 studies on the book of Revelation. He's also authored many articles on Asia Minor, some of which are found in the Dictionary of the Bible and its Reception and the Baker Bible Handbook. He's also a member of 8 academic societies and was featured in a History Channel production that was shot in Turkey called The First Christians. So, Mark, thank you so much for joining with us today.
Good to be with you, Ted.
Well, Mark, this such a fascinating country, and you're in Turkey right now, and so we share a mutual love for Turkey, and it's an amazing country. Well, first, thank you for coming on, but then also, could you perhaps tell the listeners and myself even, I'd kind of like to know this as well, what got you interested in studying the archaeology of and the history of Turkey, and how did this all come about?
Well, always enjoyed studying the Bible. I've always had an interest in history, especially ancient history. And then we got going with my education a bit late in life, trying to raise a family at the same time. And I've never traveled outside the country. And in 1992, our church got involved in Turkey, and I came over at that time and did a tour of the 7 churches. And I'll tell you, I got hooked. And so, except for 2 years, I've been back or in Turkey every year since then. So.
Awesome. So living as an American, and are you an American citizen, but you're just living in Turkey? How does that work?
Yeah, I have a long-term residency permit that the government has given me. And so, yeah, we have a very interesting and very good life here. Yeah, very safe place. I always assure people, they read those travel advisories from the State Department. They say, do we dare come? And I say, listen, my wife and I are out in the streets, so go anywhere,
Absolutely.
We feel very safe here.
And that's what I did as well. And we were there a couple of years ago, back in 2019. I was in Istanbul and then also in Eastern Turkey. And there were some things going on down on the border with Syria. And so all of my friends were like, you got to be really careful. But when I got there, it was a whole different story on the ground. Turkish people are wonderful people and a beautiful culture, a wonderful place, a lot of great history. And it's just a wonderful country. And I would really encourage people to visit Turkey.
No, absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. So where you are is Antalya. That is in Western Turkey, right? Is that in the Mediterranean? Kind of.
Yes, well, we're in South Central Turkey, so we're really at the landing point that Paul and Barnabas and John Mark came in from Cyprus. So just down the coast from us, the landing point, probably where John Mark returned to Jerusalem, deserted Paul and Barnabas, and they went to Perga. And so in Acts chapter 13, beginning in Pamphylia and then doing the Central Galatian churches, and then they came back through here again, and they departed by boat from the harbor just about a half mile from me here.
Wow.
Place I walk very regularly. So at the end of Acts 14, Atalia mentioned there is a city I get to live
That's amazing.
in. Yeah,
You're literally, Mark, you're just living in biblical history all the time. I'm jealous.
yeah. Our first 6 years that we were in Turkey, we lived in Smyrna, one of the 7 churches. So we are
Wow.
been surrounded by that.
That is fantastic. You know, we at Epic Archaeology, we're a podcast and we're a ministry that really focuses on biblical archaeology. And I've been a seminary professor myself for about 12 or 13 years, and I've taught biblical archaeology and Old Testament survey. And one of the things that I have taught, and just some things that I've gleaned from the books that I've read from great scholars like Dr. Edwin Yamauchi and Gleason
Sure.
Archer and some of the great scholars, is that the way I see it, Mark, is that, and correct me if you think you got some different insights, but archaeology really can function in one of three ways. It can clarify the text. It can help us to understand the New Testament or Old Testament in deeper, more profound ways. So it can illuminate the text, and then it can also affirm the text. And when I say affirm, of course, I don't mean prove it that it's absolutely,
Right.
100%, but it can definitely verify the historical reliability of it. We're talking about a document that's over 2,000 years old, and yet the things that are written in it, you can actually go there, you can visit these places, you can physically go to the spot where Paul was. And so I think that speaks to its reliability. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my two New Testament books I'm particularly involved in is Book of Acts and the Book of Revelation. And so both of those, on the ground here, there's just so much archaeological reality that means remains that connect into the biblical record that we can look at and that can inform our readings of these books in particular.
Absolutely. And speaking of the book of Acts, you and I were talking earlier about a scholar of yesteryear, many years ago, William Ramsey, who some people may or may not know who that is, but maybe for our listeners, could you just sort of give a little blurb about who William Ramsey was, just off the top of your head, and
Sure.
why he's important for understanding maybe the archaeology of Turkey and Asia Minor and then the New Testament as well?
Yeah, he's a British scholar in the late 1800s. Basically, had come under the influence of German, more liberal scholarship, not taking Acts as historical. And then he came over here and began to travel. You see these pictures of him with his wife, with his suit coat on, and got an umbrella with their horses. It's like, wow, that's how they used to travel. But as he went around, he found all these amazing inscriptions as he went from site to site and began to document them. And so, as you work in Asia Minor in particular, you still go through Ramsey. He's the pioneer, the foundational sort of archaeologist, epigrapher, somebody who works with inscriptions, traveled here for many occasions. His writings still are really foundational as an entry point for understanding not only the biblical world, but the whole Greco-Roman world here in Turkey.
Absolutely. And you have books that are published about him. I mean, they're his books, but then you have historical introductions to those books as well.
Yeah, when I first started getting into Ramsey, I was in the days pre-internet. So we used to have to scour used bookstores to find some of these. They were really hard to find, going to Britain as well. And so part of my motivation initially was to make these books available to students of the Bible so they could begin to use them in their own research. So that's kind of motivated my editing of some of these volumes.
That's awesome.
Now they're everywhere at PDFs free.
Oh, yeah, yeah, for sure. And those books are still in print. What would you say, if for someone who's never read Ramsey, Mark, what would you say would be a good book to start with, or maybe a couple of books?
Yeah, his book, St. Paul Traveler and Roman Citizen, is really a classic. I would do that. And his letters to the seven churches. Those two really are still very informative for our understanding of Paul and the book of Revelation.
So Ramsey was trained by the German higher critics, but yet when he came to Turkey and he saw the inscriptions and he began to see the evidence, Mark, did he change his mind? Did he have like a 180 on his view of the reliability of the text?
Yeah, very much so, because he found that the world that Luke was describing is the world he's finding here on the ground,
Exactly.
and that we're still finding here. So, that's one of the things I do is, go out and if you take the book of Acts as is and attempt to read it according to the geography and the history, you can make sense of it.
Absolutely. I was mentioning earlier, we were talking earlier, and this book here is another, the book of Acts in the Setting of Hellenistic History by Colin Heemer. This book is not cheap, by the way, but
No.
this is probably one of the modern scholars that followed William Ramsey. And
Yeah.
in Heemer's book, he lists 84 historically confirmed geographical and historical details than only an eyewitness would know. So if Luke is writing the book of Luke and he's also writing the book of Acts,
Yeah.
then it sort of stands to reason that that we have two very historically reliable books or reliable documents in the New Testament. Mark, so Hemer would be one of the 20th century. Is there anybody who's following along in his footsteps today that we should be looking out for? Maybe another book, updated version of.
Well, Hemer also wrote a very good book on the seven churches.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, take a look at that. So his volume on Acts, seven churches, again, are very important and is part of research tools to understanding these places. But as you well know, there's been a great interest in Bible backgrounds.
Yeah.
We have Bible background commentary series. I did one of these soon after I finished my own doctoral work in Revelation in the late 90s with Zondervan. They were one of the first ones to do a Bible background commentary series on the Old and New Testament. And I contributed the Revelation volume in that. And so we've got, multi-volume ones plus one volume ones. Craig Keener, of course, has done them.
Yep.
There's a new one that Baker just came out with that I contributed to as well. We have archaeology Bibles,
Yep.
both the Sandra one. I've read your reviews on this. And I was quite fortunate to be asked by Crossways to contribute both Acts and Revelation for the new ESV one. And so there's
Awesome.
just, in the last decade or more, a great interest, in looking at historical backgrounds as well.
Fantastic. Well, we'll do a transition now. We're really here today to talk about the archaeology of the seven churches of Revelation. Now, obviously, we don't have time to unpack everything there is to know about them. But what I would like to do is sort of, Mark, set the stage for our listeners, for those, because we have people who listen to our podcast who are not as well versed in the scripture as maybe somebody who went to seminary or in ministry or something. So the time of Revelation, when people think about Revelation, of course, they think about there's no telling what comes to their mind when they think about it.
Right.
But before we look at any kind of modern day application for the book of Revelation, if it has any meaning for us today, which I think it does, before we look at that, though, we need to look at the historical background and when it was written. Many people have maybe know a little bit about how it came to be written, and they sort of you can read the first part of it where John, it says he was exiled on the
Sure.
island of Patmos.
Right.
And so a lot of people think that, and there was persecution in the early church. That's not controversial.
Right.
But perhaps some people have the idea, this notion that the Roman Emperor Domitian was a very harsh persecutor of Christians. And you have written on this, Mark, in Biblical Archaeology Society. There was an article published a while back on this. And so my understanding from reading your article is that Domitian wasn't as harsh a persecutor of Christians as we have tended to think, that because of some historical research that you've done on that.
Right. I mean, we know that, Domitian's not a nice guy. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
And among Roman elite and senators, he certainly put people to death. But in the historical record, we don't have any temporary accounts, in fact, of persecution against Christians. And to me, one of the more telling things is you've got Pliny the Younger writing to Trajan 2 decades later, and he's traveling in Turkey, up in Pontus and Bithynia, and he runs across this group of Christians. This is the earliest secular historian or writer that we have talking about Christians and Christian worship. And he's asking Trajan for instruction. What do I do with these guys? And he says, and he's been a lawyer in Rome during the time of Domitian. And he says, we don't have any legal precedents. So it indicates to me that even he is unfamiliar with any persecution or proscription against Christians. So he's got to get advice here. So to me, there's just a number of indicators that we have here that this idea I think it comes from Irenaeus, the father, of course, that there was a big persecution against Christians. It's just not there.
Right. and there was persecution again from other emperors, perhaps Nero and others. But as far as Domitian, and this also, there's another thing that figures into this, and that is the dating of the book of Revelation. You know, I was going to ask you about that.
Sure.
So there's an early dating of the book and a later dating of the book. And so I guess to kind of springboard us off into looking at the seven churches, how did John end up on the island of Patmos, according to how you see this?
Well, we have Jesus's prophecy. It's called a little apocalypse, or the Olivet Discourse, in Luke 13, or Luke 21, Mark 13, and Matthew 24. And he warns the believers there in Jerusalem when you see the Roman army surrounding to flee. And one of the traditions, which I've also written on, is the Christians fleeing across the Jordan to Pella. But we also think that there are communities of these believers from Jerusalem and Judea who flee into Asia Minor. And we think that perhaps John, and we also have a tradition of Philip and his daughters in Acropolis, which is just north of Laodicea. So they come at this time, sometime in the late 60s, to in obedience to Jesus' command to get out. And so a scenario I propose is that John comes in Ephesus. We've had our first great persecution of believers under Nero in AD 66. So great fire in Rome. He blames the Christians for this general persecution. The tradition that both Peter and Paul are martyred at this time, the two witnesses, if we want to think about them a little bit, who are died publicly in the city of Rome. And then at the same time, we have the Jewish war breaking out. And then after Nero's suicide in 68, we have the most turbulent year in Roman history, the year of the four emperors. I mean, if you can imagine America having four presidents in 1 year, I mean, that's instability at its extreme, but this is what's going on in Rome at this time. And so it's in this kind of environment. And I think the Revelation is written, and the Roman governor of Asia, when John appears, let's get this guy out of the way for a while until things settle down. So anyway, that's kind of how I envision what's going on here.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah, that they just want to get him out of the way. He's like, just put him on an island somewhere.
The Romans love to do that. I mean, you can read, many in the Imperial family and senatorial families, they just send them off to an island somewhere in the Mediterranean or the Aegean.
Exactly. Except the island that John went on, it wasn't like exactly Hawaii or, the Fiji Islands or anything.
No, but it's a lovely island. It's
not
an uninhabited rock quarry kind of place. I mean, there was a Roman garrison there. There was a temple of Artemis on the island. And so there was a small village of fishermen and agricultural products on the island. And John probably lived in the cave there that traditionally is the place that now is marked as a place where he received the revelation.
I was just about to ask you that. Have you been there, and what do you make of the tradition? I think I've looked at it a little bit, and of course it's hard to know. I think it's a Greek scholar. I'm not sure. Otto Mendarius, I've read, and it looks like it's pretty legit. That it's a the cave where the church is built over could be the very spot.
Yeah, no, I really enjoy going to Patmos. My wife and I love the vacation there. And if I can put a plug in for another book, Lexham has been doing these geographical commentaries. So I had the privilege of writing the article on Patmos in the New Testament side of that. So I had the chance to do a lot more digging in Patmos and travel around the island in preparation for that. And there's a very rich history on the island. And I think that many of the traditions are legitimate. The fact that he had his nephew Prochorus with him on the island, who becomes his scribe and writing down the revelation, and maybe even is the messenger who takes the document to the seven churches, reads it, and distributes it. As you try and figure out how this all worked in real time, I think that's probably how it happened.
That's fascinating. So what we'll do now is, because we don't have a ton of time, as much as time as you can give us, but we'll do kind of a 30,000 feet view of the seven churches, and we can hit the high points. Of course, there are 7 of those, but they're actual churches in real cities in Asia Minor, in Turkey. And John, of course, wrote these letters. This is the revelation, the apocalypse, or the unveiling of Christ to the seven churches, and he has something to say to every seven church. And so this is not, now, even though Revelation itself contains apocalyptic language,
Mhm.
it's actually given to real churches that really did
Absolutely.
exist. And
Absolutely.
so we can actually go and you can discover these churches. And Mark has been there for many, many years and has been to these churches, and he's been to these cities. And there's perhaps some really good insights that we can have as New Testament readers of Revelation just by looking at the history of the city. So, Mark, I'll go ahead and let you, if you want to do a share screen, you can share your slides
Sure.
and kind of
Yeah,
walk
here
us
we
through
go.
maybe the geography starting out and the lay of the land.
Yeah, so are we good there? Ted, can you see that?
Yes, everything looks good.
Sure. So when we talk about Asia, we're not talking about the continent, although it is the continent. We're talking about the first Roman province in the Greek East, in Asia Minor in 129 BC, and you can see the boundaries there of Asia. And then all the places that are mentioned in the New Testament with blue or dots, and then also the seven churches as well, or with excuse me, the seven churches with blue, the other churches with red. Okay, and so you can see that they're located. So you have three of those on the west coast that are seaports: Ephesus, Smyrna, and Pergamum, the three largest cities. So I tell students and others that a good mnemonic to remember these is ESP. We all, that one, ESP, TSPL. So, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, the three major cities on the coast, then Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, TSP, and then Laodicea. So that's our geography, our political designation we're looking at there.
Very cool. That's a good memory device. I like
Yeah,
that.
it is. So Ephesus, still one of the premier archaeological sites in Turkey. Obviously, in the period we're in now, visitors are few, but typically millions of people visit this site. The Austrian archaeologists have been working here for over a year or over a century. And so we're coming in the upper city. This is where we usually start our tour. Now, when we talk about an agora, we're talking about a forum. It's the Latin equivalent. This is the marketplace. And so we get the word agoraphobia in our English language, of fear of
Yes.
public open spaces.
Oh,
So,
cool.
and Ephesus, being the capital of the province of Asia, has both a civic. So when the town clerk is speaking in Acts 19, he said the courts are open. Take your grievances against Paul to the courts. This is where the courts would meet. The governor would meet here. We have all the civic buildings here in the upper city here in Ephesus. So this is the upper agora.
Very cool.
Weigh
Beautiful.
in if you have any comments or anything along the
No,
way.
that's beautiful. That the now one of the things that I have on previous podcasts for Epic Archaeology, we talk about the main Roman road, the Cardo, and then the Decumanus. And the cars, so Roman roads are laid out in a north, south, east, west
Right.
direction. Is that the road in front of us? Is that the Cardo, or is that one of the main roads, or not?
Ephesus is a little bit of an exception. With direction,
Oh,
because
okay.
when Lysimachus built the city, it's built between the two mountains, and
Ah,
so it follows the topography.
okay.
Unlike Smyrna and the other cities where we have a much more definite east-west, north-south orientation, Ephesus is a little bit off, but we do certainly have main roads.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so this is the main Kurites Street goes down to the commercial agora at the bottom of the street below here.
And what we're looking at, Mark, is first century. Is that right?
Yeah, so most of this here was at the end of the first century, latter half. We have 12 major monuments up here that would have been in existence at the time of Paul,
Cool.
and then going on into John.
Gotcha. Did
Yeah.
they also, Ephesus also have a praetorium, what we call a praetorium, or the city, the government center, I guess? That would be where he would, I guess, all the legal stuff would happen.
Right, and to the right there, you see kind of an arch sticking up there with Doric columns. Simplest one, there's an Odeon. So the
Okay.
Odeon is where the boule, or it's sometimes called the Bouleuterion.
Yes.
And so if you're looking at the government of a Greek city, the boule is the Senate, and the demos is like the House of Representatives. So the founders of America sort of modeled their government on the ancient Greek cities. So
Very cool.
Yep. So I tell visitors when they come into Ephesus that we're entering into the visual world of Revelation. So one of the key words in Revelation is to overcome, to be victorious. And here we have Miss Nike, goddess of victory. And so look what she's holding in her left hand. She's got a wreath. This is the victory wreath that the victors in the game would be awarded. So Paul uses this imagery. We compete not for a perishable wreath. So sometimes crown can be a little bit misleading. We think of maybe something Queen Elizabeth wears, like an old thing on her head.
Not a tiara.
Yeah, tiara. Yeah, basically these are made of organic materials, oak leaves or something else. So she's got that in her left hand. And so, for example, the promise to the believers in Smyrna, I will give you the wreath of life, that imperishable wreath. And then in her right hand, she's got the palm branches. So in Revelation 7:9, when John looks into heaven and he sees these people around the throne wearing white robes and holding palm branches, we're not told who they are. But just by what they're wearing, what they're holding, we know that they are the victors who are now around the throne of heaven. So
that's awesome.
This is the visual world that the first readers, hearers would have understood. But for us, we need a little help, from archaeology.
And this is where archaeology brings that illumination. That's a great example.
Yeah, absolutely. So the whole background in Revelation is the struggle against the two beasts, the beast out of the sea, the beast out of the land. And this is typically connected with Roman government, the provincial governors, and then the imperial cult. And so we have three temples that are built, first in Pergamum, then in Smyrna, and then this one in Ephesus in the 1st century. So this dates to the late 80s. It's the only one we have. The other temples, both in Pergamum and Smyrna, are no more archaeologically. So it's very important to see.
And Mark, at this point, let me ask you, we were talking about the Roman, the Imperial cult temple, and we were talking earlier about Domitian, and one of the other sort of misconceptions is that the reason why John was exiled in Patmos is because he didn't recognize him as God. And I think on some of your research, there's really no indication that he had that edict. Is that right? Is my understanding correct on that?
Yeah, and we'll look at a slide here in just a couple minutes related to this. All of these emperors used imperial titles that overlapped with Jesus and God. So it's not peculiar to Domitian. I mean, it starts all the way with Augustus in the 1st century.
Yes.
So, they're all, full of themselves. And
had, the Pontifex Maximus. Yeah.
For sure. So let's move along. This is all that's left of the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of ancient world. So
wow.
If you go to Ephesus today, this is one of the most disappointing things that you see. Yeah, much of the year it's just a swamp. So when J.T. Wood tried to excavate this in the 1860s, so many of his workers got malaria because of the type of excavation they were having to do here. So they've set up one column.
Just
127 columns.
The Temple of Artemis, 1.5 columns tall.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, don't be disappointed when you come to that. Now, if you look on that back column, or behind the standing column, you see a complex which the church related to John, the basilica that's built up there. And so the first memorial to John, and the tradition is it's John the Apostle, the disciple who's buried there. Then the present remains that are up there date to Justinian, the 6th century. And so this is what you see when you go into the apse of the church. Apse is that semicircular area that these churches always facing east. And so this is the traditional site of the grave of John. And I think it's very reliable. This is built over an ancient necropolis or cemetery that he would have been buried in. And for the first 250 years, the Christians in Ephesus maintained the tradition, knowledge of where he was buried. And then after Christianity is legalized, you have this first 4-posted monument that's built over his grave.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yep.
And that dates to the time of Justinian. or at least that
Yeah,
church
yeah,
does.
the church that's around it. But this monument, I think, is early 4th century.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's called a ciborium is the name for it, with the 4 posts. You
Yes.
still see it over the graves of very important saints in the churches here. How we doing?
Very good. It's
So
on, just
moving on.
soaking. Great.
So we move on to Smyrna, and this is one of the big challenges of urban archaeology. So you've got a modern city built over an ancient city. And the only reason that this area was preserved, it was a Muslim cemetery.
Oh,
And
man.
so they came in here and they began to excavate right here in the city center, and they found the Agora, the marketplace here. And they've been doing work here now for several decades, doing some restoration and reconstruction. And so it's really quite a remarkable site right in the city center of modern Izmir.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, Mark, do the people in that local area, do they also find this fascinating? Are they as interested in this period of history as perhaps Westerners are, Europeans and Americans?
Yeah, very much so. So the head of the excavation here, Hakan Ersoy, is a good friend of mine. I've contributed to some of their volumes that they published. And so, yeah, they're really attempting to make this a premier archaeological site right in the city with the blessing of the city fathers.
That's great. I've always thought it was interesting because I've done some work in Israel and the West Bank, how different, depending on where the archaeological site is, I think that, you know, where these places are, I think, is just as important politically today as the fact that they're there. In other words, what I'm saying is that you have to have a good custodianship of the site in order for it to be preserved. And if you have if it's in a location where people just don't really care about it, then it really makes it difficult for anybody like archaeologists to go in there and to do further studies and research on it. Because as you know, Mark, there's a lot of looting that goes on uh, around the world, and especially in Egypt and other parts of the Middle East as well.
Well, that's a big problem in Turkey too, and especially these rural sites. Many friends were Turkish archaeologists, and they realize that whenever they start probing in areas, that's going to attract attention from locals. Illegal excavations will take place. So it remains a big issue here in Turkey.
Yep, very cool. That's an amazing site.
Yeah, and so
And
what you're looking at the background is the ancient Acropolis. That's the high city, and this is where Alexander the Great actually moved the city when he came through here in the early or late 4th century at the foot of this mountain. And the famous bishop of the city, Polycarp, was martyred in the stadium on top of this Acropolis. Fortunately, that stadium doesn't exist anymore, but we know the location where it was at.
and I'm presuming, Mark, also that under a lot of those residential housing and stuff like that, there are still archaeological remains of the city.
Right, and so what they did is there are a number of illegal structures on this hillside, and they've been moved out, and they're in a process now of excavating the theater and developing that. And part of the purpose of that is to use it again for public events, concerts, plays, and other things. So they're very actively being done in Turkey now is to rehabilitate, things, especially like theaters, which have a very useful purpose.
Very cool. That is so cool.
Now, one more
I've
thing
never.
I'm going to mention here, Ted. So you see under the metal uh, roofing that you've got here in the lower left part of the screen.
Yes.
Well, about a decade ago, they made one of the most important archaeological finds that I think in many years here in Turkey. And they discovered in the galleries of this lower area there, as they cleaned them, the largest group of Greek graffiti ever been found.
Oh,
So when
man.
we think of Latin graffiti, we think of Pompeii. That's where they found this. But now there are thousands of examples in these galleries underground, and we can take our groups down there and see them. And so this is where archaeology can indirectly inform us, because we know that one of the most notorious numbers in the history is 666. So it puzzles us today. What in the world does this mean? But we know that the ancients had a way of using, because both in Hebrew and Greek, numbers or letters were used to calculate numbers. And so we have examples of this called gematria or isopsephism here has been found. in these galleries here in Izmir. And so one of the frequent thing is I love the girl whose number is. And so they calculate their girlfriend's name using a number.
Oh, very cool. Wow.
And so we have one of these, and her number is 731.
That is
And
so fascinating.
it is. And then we also have an example of a Christian one. So we have a Christian here in Smyrna who's realized that the sum of the letters of kurios is the same as pistis, of faith. So it says pistis omega, which is the letter representing 800, pistis, or kurios omega, pistis omega. They both equal 800. And
800.
So this is carved into the wall here in Smyrna.
Wow. Several years ago, I was in Dallas, Texas, or actually Plano, and got to have some interaction with the Green family, who actually purchases a lot of different archaeological artifacts. And anyway, they had some of these Greek manuscripts that were getting from mummy cartonnage. And we had Dan Wallace there, who is a professor of New Testament Greek.
I know Dan. Yeah.
You know Dan, and Dan was saying, it was so funny. He said some of the earliest Greek manuscripts actually doesn't. The number is not 666; it's 676 or something like that. He said that's the neighbor.
616.
616. That's it. Yeah. He said that's the neighbor of the beast.
Yeah.
But that's really, I've never heard that. So it's pronounced isophysicism or sophism.
Yeah, isophysicism, and that's the word that we find actually calculate the number, which is 666, is the same Greek word for this. So
that is really fascinating. I've heard also, Mark, and maybe you could speak to this or just share your thoughts on it, where different scholars have different ideas about that. Of course, that is a really good insight that I've never really heard before. And the other one is that 6, of course, being the number of man, 3 being the number of God. When you triple, man trying to make himself God. Have you heard that interpretation of 666?
Yeah, I've heard all of the interpretations, but I think that calculating Nero's name in Hebrew comes to Neron Kaiser is 666. And then if you drop the noon off of that, you get 616. So we can account for that in that way. So that seems to me the most plausible interpretation.
Fascinating. Thank you.
So let's look at Pergamum. This is quite the city. So this is the capital of the Attalid Empire, then became the first capital of Asia. Has the steepest theater in the Greek East. You can see the theater hanging off the hillside. And then you can just see part of the reconstruction of the Trajan temple that sits on the very top. This is the only Roman structure that's on this Acropolis. It rises 1,000 feet up above the valley floor below.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a fascinating looking site.
Yeah, and it's really important. The Germans are working here. So the German Archaeological Institute have been involved here for over 100 years, and they're still in charge of the site.
I was just about to ask you before you say that who is excavating there, but and that's absolutely right. The Germans have been in Turkey for over 100 years, and it really, I don't know if it goes back to Hugo Winkler, but one of the first important archaeological discoveries in Turkey was by the German archaeologist Hugo Winkler, who discovered the ancient city of Hattusha, which is the capital of the Hittite Empire.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you've got the German Archaeological Institute in, I believe it's in Istanbul. And there may be one in.
They have a branch there, and they do very nice publications. A couple of years ago, they have an excellent volume on Pergamum that's bilingual Turkish and English, with wonderful drawings, wonderful pictures. So one of the things I've done here with the research center is to collect these books. Many of them, you can't find outside of Turkey. So I don't want to boast, but I think I probably have the best collection of books on the 7 churches of anywhere in the world.
Awesome. And speaking of your research center, is this a place where scholars could go, like seminary students or anybody really who wants to study your Antalya Research Center to really study the period and the history and the geography and the archaeology of the region?
Yeah, I had one of my master's students here living and working on his thesis here. We've got a good friend who's got a Fulbright who will be coming this fall and working out of the center. So just encourage anybody who, whether on sabbatical or wanting to do research on Asia Minor, yeah, come and see us in Antalya. We have wonderful low-cost boutique hotels here close by in the old city. So yeah, come on by. We've got a very good collection on focusing really on early Judaism, Christianity, and Asia Minor, but it's really grown beyond to the entire Eastern Mediterranean.
Awesome. Awesome. Check that out, people. You can go to it's Seven Churches, www.sevenchurches.com, right, Mark?
About .org.
.org, excuse me. Yeah, .org. So, okay, so Pergamum, that is, so the thing on the columns are actually from the period of Trajan, is that right?
Right, and so we introduce a archaeological term, anastylosis, so that the doing of the reconstruction to suggest what it would look like.
Right.
So typically, European archaeologists are averse to doing full-scale restorations. So they prefer to do what's called anastylosis, and this is what you have on this temple.
Yes.
So,
and Trajan, for people who have visited Rome, this is the same Trajan where's Trajan's column, which is, I believe, the battle against the who was it? They're the people the Romans were fighting.
I think the Dacians are on.
The Dacians, that's right, because they had the funny hats. But it wraps around the whole column, and it's sort of like the whole. And this Trajan's column is important for Roman history because it actually lets us see what the Roman army was dressed like, what their equipment was like, and helps archaeologists to really identify some of the artifacts that we find in Pompeii and other places in the Roman Empire.
Yeah, one of our current book projects right now is we're working on Paul's arrival in Rome, and so there's very good descriptions on how they built roads, because we talk a lot about the Appian Way, the Via Appia, in this project, that showed how they built roads and bridges on the column. So it's wonderful visual examples of that.
Very cool.
Let me move on here. So you see the pine trees just above. We're going to look down on those here. And so this is where the altar of Zeus stood.
Oh, wow.
So this was the largest altar in antiquity. So we think about, of course, the altar at the temple in Jerusalem, and the sacrifices that were going on here. Well, you can imagine, you can see the city below, 1,000 feet below, and you can just imagine the sacrifices, smoke billowing up, from the top of this altar that once existed. So now, one of the things that happened in the Christian period, and we know that John of Ephesus in the 6th century went throughout the province of Asia, destroying any remaining pagan temples and shrines. So we believe then that this is the period when this altar was finally destroyed. And then in the later Byzantine period, they took the pieces of these and used it as fill for Byzantine walls. And so, of course, this is the famous altar that's been reconstructed in Berlin today. And I don't know if you would address this in your discussions, the whole thing of what do you do with these archaeological artifacts that have been removed from the countries of origin?
Exactly.
And of course, the Turks would love to get this back. But the reality is that this was in pieces, and that his name just escapes me right now, who actually came to Pergamum. He's buried on the site. But he was walking around the Acropolis there, and he saw a local Turkish man burning pieces of limestone. Excuse me, burning pieces of marble. And they used to do this in all of these sites to get limestone for building material. And the Turkish workman pointed to the wall that he was working on, and the archaeologists there realized that this is probably coming from the altar of Zeus.
Wow.
And so if he had not carried off these pieces to Rome, they would be gone today. So that's the other side of the argument.
Exactly. And there are many, I mean, from the British Museum to the Louvre to what's the one in the Ishtar Gate in the Pergamum Museum in Berlin. And it's been completely reconstructed. It was from ancient Babylon. And I've been to the Archaeological Museum in Istanbul. They have the panels of the lions and the different creatures. Here in Chicago, I lead trips to the Oriental Institute Museum, and there are 2 panels from the processional way. And so when you see the modern wars that have taken place and the political strife, and even Nineveh, has been destroyed partially by ISIS and by some of the other terrorist groups. And then in Syria, you've got the amazing city of Palmyra that was bulldozed. So, I mean, that's, you know, there's give and take on that. And so I think providentially, maybe it's a good thing that some of these artifacts are in museums in Europe.
Yeah, so that's the politics of archaeology.
That's right.